R. Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. Trump used this section during both his first and second terms to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum, claiming the imports threatened national security. This law allows the president to impose tariffs after a Commerce Department investigation to protect domestic industries. While some lower courts have questioned its constitutionality, the Supreme Court ruling did not completely repeal Section 232 tariffs, limiting their use only when combined with IEEPA. Trump can continue to maintain certain tariffs through this law, but will require stricter congressional oversight. 3. Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. Trump used this section to impose billions of dollars in tariffs on China in response to unfair trade practices, such as intellectual property theft. This law authorizes the United States Trade Representative USTR to investigate and impose retaliatory tariffs. Impact of the ruling. The Supreme Court ruling did not directly repeal Section 301 tariffs, finding them to have a clearer congressional authorization and therefore unaffected by the unconstitutionality of IEEPA. By examining the relevant laws, we can see that the unconstitutional ruling is primarily based on the emergency situation surrounding IEEPA, rendering Trump's trade decisions unconstitutional. Trump cited an excessively broad scope in his efforts to rapidly advance the trade war, hence the unconstitutional ruling. However, the matter doesn't end there. If Trump's trade war itself is the outcome, then this ruling at least demonstrates the devastating impact of IEEPA tariffs on Trump's policies. But it's clear to everyone that Trump's trade tariffs are a means to an end. His goal is to reshape the American trade system. Therefore, the unconstitutional ruling will not affect the current established goals of U.S. tariffs for the following reasons. First, the Trade Act of 1962 and 1974 remain in effect, covering most of Trump's trade policies, and Trump still has the power to maintain global tariffs for a 180-day period. Second, the tariff trade war has lasted for a year, and the relevant countries have signed new trade agreements with the Trump administration. The re-signing of these agreements signifies that national-level tariff trade has been restructured into new trade relations, and whether Trump's actions are unconstitutional or not, no longer affects the effectiveness of the new trade agreements. Third, countries that haven't yet signed trade agreements, or those where negotiations have entered a substantive stage, or those that have reservations about Trump's legally mandated 180-year trade deadline, will ultimately reach agreements due to the inherent advantages of the U.S. market and resources. However, Trump's perceived unconstitutionality will limit his bargaining power, but this won't affect the final outcome. Fourth, even if the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, is proven unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, it doesn't mean Trump can't invoke it later. It simply raises the bar significantly, especially against China. Because the relevant legal obstacles were cleared during Biden's term, Trump's use of IEEPA to impose global tariffs is unacceptable. However, once the U.S.-China confrontation truly takes place, Trump's use of IEEPA would be constitutional, and the unconstitutionality issue would cease to exist. 5. The 1st of February 2025. Somalia airstrikes. Under Trump's direct orders, the U.S. conducted airstrikes against ISIS targets in Somalia, killing several senior members and coordinating with the Somali government. This was one of the first counter-terrorism expansion actions of his second term. 6. The 13th of March, 2025. Precision airstrikes in Iraq. The U.S. military conducted precision strikes in Anbar province, killing the ISIS global operations leader. 7. March-May 2025. Large-scale strikes in Yemen. The U.S. Navy and Air Force launched large-scale strikes against Houthi radar, air defense, and missile launch sites, destroying infrastructure in response to attacks on ships in the Red Sea. The UK later joined in. 8. June 2025. Trump ordered a joint strike with Israel against Iranian nuclear facilities, claiming to destroy the nuclear program. 9. December 2025. Syria. In response to the Palmyra attack on U.S. forces, the U.S. military launched large-scale strikes against ISIS targets, destroying over 70 facilities, extending into early 2026.1. The 25th of December 2025. Christmas airstrikes in Nigeria. The U.S. military coordinated with the Nigerian government to conduct airstrikes against ISIS targets in Sokoto State in the northwest, which Trump called a Christmas gift, targeting attacks against Christians. The above 6 events primarily revolve around counterterrorism operations, achieving results through precise, swift, and surgical strikes. Among them, the collapse of the Syrian regime was directly caused, ushering in Trump's true era of hegemony, an era of direct military intervention and regime change in other countries. 11. The 3rd of January 2026, Venezuela. The United States launched Operation Absolute Resolve, raiding Caracas, the Venezuelan capital, capturing President Nicolás Maduro and his wife Celia Flores, and extraditing them to New York for trial. The U.S. subsequently took over Venezuelan oil sales, with Trump declaring he would run the country until a transitional government was established. This event is considered a key move by the Trump administration to counter China's influence in the Western Hemisphere, with China widely regarded as one of the biggest losers. China is Venezuela's largest creditor, providing approximately $60 billion in official loans through the oil for loan model, with total investments reaching $100 billion, primarily repaid with Venezuelan oil. Approximately 80% of Venezuela's sanctioned oil exports, about 500,000 barrels per day, flow to China, supplied at discounted prices, far below market value. China imports about 11 million barrels of crude oil daily, with Venezuela accounting for nearly 5%. After the U.S. took over oil sales, these supplies were disrupted or redirected, forcing China to supplement its supply from other sources such as the Middle East at higher prices, increasing energy costs. This also impacts supply chain security. Venezuela owes China approximately $20 billion, or the equivalent of 4.4 billion barrels of oil, and the incident could lead to further defaults. China has recovered most of the principal, but the remaining debt, estimated at $10.15 billion, faces uncertainty. The U.S. may use this as leverage to force China to make concessions in debt restructuring. The value of Chinese investments in Venezuela, such as refineries and infrastructure, has plummeted. Beijing has initiated an assessment, planning to minimize losses and adjust its overseas investment strategy to avoid similar high-risk oil diplomacy. Venezuela is China's all-weather strategic partner in Latin America, and the incident marks a victory for the U.S. Trump-Monroe Doctrine, weakening China's Belt and Road Initiative's presence in the Western Hemisphere. Chinese-operated ground stations and dual-use facilities in Venezuela, such as space tracking stations, may be shut down. These are used for remote access and potential intelligence gathering. U.S. pressure on the interim government to sever such connections affects China's strategic projection in the Americas. Reports indicate that Russia was aware of the U.S. operation in advance but did not notify China, despite Chinese diplomats meeting with Maduro within 24 hours of the operation, highlighting the potential weakness in the unlimited friendship between China and Russia. China felt betrayed, impacting future cooperation. The meeting between China and Maduro, followed by the arrest 24 hours later, was a major embarrassment for China. China's strategy, after encountering Trump, offered no resistance, remaining entirely passive. This incident is seen as a warning to China, potentially extending to Taiwan or other hotspots. The Chinese Foreign Ministry accused the U.S. of acting as a world judge and confronting Washington at the UN, highlighting Beijing's diplomatic limitations on global hotspots. China's investment model in Venezuela, resources for loans, is being questioned, and other Latin American countries may reassess their relations with China to avoid similar U.S. intervention. Furthermore, the air defense radar sold by China to Venezuela failed to detect U.S. troops during the operation, failing along with Russian equipment. This damaged China's image as a major arms exporter, especially in competition with other countries such as Pakistan. China's image as a reliable friend of Venezuela was also damaged. The meeting between the Chinese envoy and Maduro before the operation, which failed to prevent, sparked internal criticism. Chinese media and commentators acknowledged the negative impact and emphasized the need to reassess overseas commitments. This commitment is neither the first nor the last to fail. Repeated failures directly determine that China's strategic projection based on the Belt and Road Initiative has been fragmented by Trump. Simply recovering the initial investment costs would be a victory for China. 12. February 2026. Massive Iranian strike. On the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a joint airstrike against Iranian military facilities, nuclear sites, missile launchers, naval fleets, and leadership targets. This operation lasted several days and was still ongoing on March 4, aiming to destroy Iran's nuclear program, missile capabilities, and to promote regime change. The strikes included the first attack on nuclear facilities, killing Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and other senior officials. Iran retaliated, including missile strikes against US and Israeli targets and Gulf states, but suffered significant losses. This strike was considered a devastating blow to Iran's national security, leading to collapse in multiple sectors. Iran vowed not to yield, but internal instability and external isolation worsened. US and Israeli warplanes gained control of western Iran and the airspace over Tehran, destroying approximately 300 missile launchers, command centers, and air bases. Iran retaliated with missile and drone strikes against Israeli and US bases, but with limited effect, resulting in further damage. Satellite imagery shows at least 3 buildings destroyed in Natanz, facilities previously damaged in a 2025 attack. An IAEA report indicates that the disruption to Iran's nuclear activities could delay its nuclear weapons pursuit for years. China, Iran's largest trading partner and oil buyer, accounting for approximately 25% of Iran's oil exports, views Iran as a key node and strategic ally in the Belt and Road Initiative. China imports approximately 500,000 barrels of oil daily from Iran. The reduced supply following the attack has led to a shift to other Middle Eastern sources, increasing costs. The surge in global oil prices triggered a stock market crash, with Chinese stocks falling 5 to 10%, impacting supply chains and economic growth. Iran is a partner for China in countering US hegemony. Regime change could bring a pro-US government to power, reducing Chinese investment, such as in infrastructure. China is concerned about the conflict escalating to Taiwan or other hotspots. China dispatched a special envoy to mediate, condemning the US attack as foolish but avoiding direct involvement. Russia's response could expose differences between China and Russia. China promotes peace at the United Nations, but its influence is limited. Strikes could spur Iran's nuclear weapons pursuit, indirectly affecting China's nuclear policy. Chinese companies face the risk of sanctions, and global trade is disrupted.